Bona tarda, benvinguts a la Casa dels Arquitectes i de l'Arquitectura de Barcelona, al Col·legi d'Arquitectes, amb aquest acte sobre els arquitectes nacionals, els arquitectes d'Estat, en el marc del Congrés d'Arquitectura. Em toca en aquesta primera intervenció emmarcar-la dins del Congrés, és a dir, explicar per què un acte com aquest i per què un acte com aquest en un Congrés com aquest. De fet, i alguns de vosaltres ja heu estat en alguns actes del Congrés, perquè ja portem uns mesos i, per tant, segurament una part del que diré ara us pot sonar repetitiu, però pels que no ho heu viscut, congressos d'arquitectura és una activitat que el Col·legi d'Arquitectes ha fet des de pràcticament des de la seva fundació. De fet, hi va haver un primer congrés pocs anys després que es creés la primera associació d'arquitectes, a finals del 1900. Durant el segle passat es van fer 7 o 8 congressos importants, el primer el 1931, molt rellevant, que va donar peu a modificacions legislatives, i a partir d'aquí hi ha hagut uns quants importants. Segurament el darrer congrés significatiu va ser el darrer congrés, el de fa just 20 anys, el del 1996, el congrés que recordem tots com a congrés de la UIA, perquè va tenir un abast internacional. Aquell congrés, segurament, i de forma injusta, ha quedat en la nostra memòria a partir d'algunes fotografies, de les fotografies del Foster i de la fotografia sobretot del Peter Eisman amb la samarreta del Barça. I dic de forma injusta perquè és un congrés que, si es mira el que es va escriure, doncs és un congrés que sí que va treballar. També, no sé si de forma injusta o no, però per sort no ens ha quedat a la memòria, el titular del dia després del País era alguna cosa així com èxit en el Congrés d'Arquitectura malgrat la falta de debat. Això és quelcom que quan ens vam plantejar si tocava o no fer un congrés teníem molt clar com a referència. Si el col·legi ha promogut congressos en moments en els quals es creia o crèiem que perquè s'estava en un moment de canvi, perquè hi havia preguntes importants o perquè hi havia situacions que ho requerien, convenia aixecar el cap i reflexionar col·lectivament, ara ens semblava que tornava a tocar, que tocava i que era important, perquè estem en un moment de canvi com no hem viscut segurament cap de nosaltres, un moment on no està canviant només la professió, sinó que està canviant tot l'entorn, tot el marc d'aquesta professió. Per tant, un moment per fer reflexió, sobretot quan ja portem uns quants anys de canvi, per tant, quan ja podem començar a entendre el que passa, o això és el que creiem quan vam llançar el Congrés, i des d'aquest punt de vista vam plantejar un congrés que va adoptar com a lema un congrés per construir una visió col·lectiva de futur. Amb els mesos que portem fent trobades com aquesta, segurament les 3 paraules ja han anat canviant i la demostració que és un congrés que genera una visió col·lectiva probablement és el canvi d'aquest significat de les paraules. Congrés, en seguim dient congrés, però s'ha convertit en la suma d'actes com aquests, més de 120 actes com aquests que ajuden a fer reflexions com la que farem avui, reflexions específiques que sumades confiem que ens donguin aquesta visió. Per tant, Congrés no és l'acció habitual de 2 dies de trobades, sinó que sobretot haurà sigut uns mesos amb 120 trobades, amb 120 debats específics que ens permetin anar acumulant aquesta reflexió i, a més, convocar la participació. En aquests 120 actes hi hauran hagut, la setmana passada, hi havia ja 3.000 persones, 3.000 majoritàriament arquitectes participant en aquestes trobades. Però el canvi de la paraula, el canvi del significat o la definició diferent de la paraula congrés aplicada a el que estem fent, també ha arrossegat el canvi de visió. Quan el planteig deia per construir una visió col·lectiva de futur, inicialment, segurament tots plegats ens imaginàvem, sense haver-ho analitzat massa, visió com allò que es fa de, tancant una mica els ulls, veure què és el que passarà. De fet, el que hem anat veient i el que s'ha posat de relleu aquests 2 mesos, aquests 3 mesos, sobretot aquest mes final, és que en cada un d'aquests actes, i estic convençut que avui també passarà, el que es fa, el que passa, és que s'il·lumina, no es parla tant de què podria ser d'un futur quimèric, sinó que s'il·lumina, es posa el foco en una determinada realitat, en una determinada situació, en una determinada pregunta i, per tant, es posa de relleu una part de la realitat. Per tant, aquesta visió col·lectiva que estem construint no és una, ho direm en castellà, ensoñació, no és una visió quimèrica, sinó que no és res més que estar il·luminant, de vegades fins i tot amb diversos focus i per tant de maneres diferents, una realitat que ja existeix segmentadament. Avui, insisteixo, una realitat molt desconeguda a casa nostra, com és la dels arquitectes d'estat. També, i amb això acabo la presentació del Congrés, això ens ha portat a entendre un cert canvi en l'última paraula de la frase, de futur, quan dèiem construir una visió col·lectiva de futur, perquè aquesta manera d'anar enfocant la realitat, el que també ens ha fet anar constatant és que el futur no és quelcom que s'ha d'inventar, no és quelcom que cal projectar com fem amb els projectes, sinó que de fet l'únic que cal és veure quines són les bones coses del present que ja ens estan portant cap al futur. I moltes de les reflexions que hem anat veient amb alguns dels actes, i segurament aquesta d'avui, ja estan construint futur. No necessàriament serà la projecció del que veiem, però el debat del que fem és el que està construint el futur. Per tant, gràcies per participar en aquesta acció que ens seguim dient Congrés, que seguim parlant de visió, que seguim parlant de futur, però que segurament ha anat adquirint un significat diferent al que podríem esperar al principi del Congrés. I a més, i en aquest cas, entenem que des d'una perspectiva que per innovadora, per sorprenent, no deixa de ser atractiva i pertinent. Arquitectes d'estat, i ara entrarem en matèria, arquitectes de país, arquitectes nacionals, és una expressió que només de dir-la sorprèn. En aquestes últimes setmanes, quan explicàvem doncs farem un acte, o avui mateix, quan explicàvem farem un acte que tracta d'això, en general, aquí a casa nostra ha sorprès moltíssim. No sé si us ha passat, si hem pogut percebre aquesta sorpresa, però sorprèn. Per què? Sorprèn perquè és una categoria mental que no havíem encetat. Fins ara, la qüestió de la qualitat arquitectònica, de la visió arquitectònica global, l'havíem sempre subscrit, en el millor dels casos, en l'àmbit local. I donàvem per suposat i per obvi que, en tot cas, si hi havia reflexió des de la globalitat, és a dir, per dir-ho d'una altra manera, al marge de l'obra pública, que té uns altres mecanismes de ser desenvolupada, l'obra no pública essencialment era una qüestió privada. I l'únic instrument o l'única escala que actuava sobre una qüestió eminentment privada, que era l'arquitectura, era l'escala local. Plantejar el tema dels arquitectes d'estat no és només plantejar una manera, sobretot és plantejar un dubte sobre l'escala i plantejar que per sobre de l'escala local hi ha altres escales on el debat de l'arquitectura i el debat arquitectònic i el debat del territori són tan importants com a l'escala local. Des d'aquest punt de vista voldria agrair la iniciativa de l'Incasòl i la iniciativa del Departament, la iniciativa del Vicente Guallart, que és d'alguna manera el que ens va ajudar a descobrir aquesta pista, agrair la presència dels ponents i confiar en que sigui útil per tots vostès i que ens permeti construir una peça més d'aquesta visió del present que ens ajuda a entendre quin podria ser el nostre millor futur. Moltes gràcies, Vicente, endavant.
Moltes gràcies, Lluís, per la presentació. En primer lloc, volia donar gràcies a l'Incasòl, amb la figura de l'Albert, el Pere i la Rosa, que quan vam començar a parlar fa uns mesos sobre quina podia ser l'aportació de l'IAC al debat al voltant en el Congrés, també vaig compartir, en el fons, la coincidència d'haver anat a Austràlia i haver-me trobat no tan sols amb un espècimen raro, diguem-ne, que és com una nova espècie. Vas per la selva, et trobes una espècie, em vaig trobar un arquitecte del govern. I curiosament també fa 3 anys vaig conèixer el teu antecessor, de fet a Brasil, que era també l'arquitecte, el chief arquitecte de l'Estat d'Holanda, que feia una tasca, en aquest cas, als Estats Units. Llavors, en aquesta reflexió, això lliga, en el fons, també amb un concepte que plantejava Lluís sempre, que deia que la missió dels arquitectes és fer projectes. El que ens diferencia de la resta del món és que nosaltres fem projectes i que tenim aquesta capacitat en realitat de visualitzar el futur i d'integrar molts inputs molt diversos per acabar de fer un projecte. Llavors vam plantejar la idea aquesta també donat en el procés en el que ens trobem en Catalunya i en part en el món, la idea de si podíem plantejar un país com a projecte. És a dir, què passaria si els arquitectes que en general treballen per l'administració, desenvolupen projectes urbanístics o vetllen per la qualitat arquitectònica, com podíem plantejar el debat al voltant de parlar de l'arquitectura amb una escala que és diferent de les ciutats, com bé deia el Lluís. Això lliga també amb un altre fet que quan hem fet aquesta recerca, que ara us explicaré, vam descobrir, i era una cosa que ja intuïem, i és que tradicionalment els arquitectes han treballat sobre els edificis i sobre l'escala territorial. Quan històricament havíem vist com s'organitzava l'estat espanyol o la Generalitat o altres estats, veiem que havia una certa disgregació, per exemple, en l'àmbit de l'energia, en relació a l'urbanisme, de vegades en l'àmbit de l'habitatge, ara mateix en la pròpia Generalitat està separada de l'àmbit tradicional de l'arquitectura i de l'urbanisme. Per tant, la idea de que algú tingués una certa missió d'intentar coordinar d'alguna manera diversos àmbits que tots ells tenen que veure amb el projecte, amb una escala que no és la de la ciutat o la de l'edifici, sinó la que és la d'un país, vam trobar que hi havia llocs del món en el qual això es feia. De fet, això es fa sota noms diferents, perquè hi ha llocs en els quals li diuen arquitecte de l'Estat, State Architect, hi ha llocs que li diuen arquitecte del govern, que també és un nom diferent, també hi ha llocs que li diuen Chief Architect de l'Estat. Llavors, el que vam plantejar és fer un informe que es presentarà quan acabem d'escoltar aquest debat, en el qual vam descobrir, per exemple, que als Estats Units hi ha alguns estats, en concret, ara tinc aquí un mapa que sembla de les eleccions d'anit, que veiem molts mapes, però bàsicament a Califòrnia, a Ohio i a Tennessee existeix l'arquitecte de l'Estat. I bàsicament, en aquest cas, té una missió o té un origen que sempre té que veure amb una certa arquitectura pública i en moltes ocasions vinculada, en el cas de Califòrnia, per exemple, venen del món de l'arquitectura de les escoles, perquè són algunes de les tipologies que desenvolupen des de l'Estat, i tot això, en el cas americà, ha evolucionat cap a un àmbit més vinculat a la generació d'unes certes normatives que intenten implantar en diversos àmbits del seu estat. En el cas d'Europa, el que vam trobar és el cas més paradigmàtic, que és l'holandès, i per això el Floris avui ens explicarà què significa l'arquitecte, de fet el Chief Architect de l'Estat i amb tota la seva tradició, però vam trobar també que en un lloc que no és ara mateix un estat, sinó que és una regió que és Flandres, fa uns anys van decidir també crear l'arquitecte del govern, i de fet han hagut una sèrie de problemes, semblava que anava a desaparèixer la figura, al final ha aparegut. És a dir, també tenim en Europa alguna regió que també intenta implantar aquesta figura amb un tamany de projecte més gran que una ciutat. Però el que acaba de corroborar que aquest és un model que es pot aplicar de manera sistèmica és el cas australià, que com sabeu, Austràlia té 7 estats que són molt, molt grans, perquè és un país molt gran, però bàsicament en cada un dels estats tenen un arquitecte del govern i, a més, el que és més important no és que hi hagi un arquitecte del govern, sinó que tenen una xarxa d'arquitectes del govern de tots els estats que treballen d'una manera molt activa per intercanviar experiències, per ajudar-se els uns als altres, etc. És a dir, si traslladéssim aquest model australià al cas europeu, trobaríem que cada país d'Europa, com Holanda, com França, com Espanya, en el seu cas Catalunya o d'altres, tindrien un arquitecte que tindria com a missió intentar impulsar i coordinar els diversos departaments del propi estat, vetllar per la qualitat de l'arquitectura i, a més, relacionar-se amb, diguem-ne, amb persones com ells d'altres estats i intentar desenvolupar una certa política pública. També s'ha de dir que que la tradició que tenim aquí, a Catalunya, lògicament, és una altra en la qual, per exemple, el Col·legi d'Arquitectes té una importància molt gran per vetllar la qualitat de l'arquitectura. També aquí a Catalunya mirem què fan altres països. De fet, la llei de l'arquitectura que estem desenvolupant ara, que jo crec que clarament és un referent molt bo per vetllar per aquesta qualitat, també ha estat inspirat per altres lleis, com per exemple la francesa, i per tant jo crec que el fet de que l'arquitectura es pugui debatre a nivell, el nostre àmbit regional, això vol dir a nivell europeu, i que tot això ajudi a desenvolupar polítiques, jo crec que també és un tema absolutament rellevant. Llavors, per no allargar-me, deixaré que expliquin Floris què significa per ells la seva missió i què és el que fan en el seu país i com ajuden en el seu treball. Després Peter ens explicarà què és el que fan ells a Austràlia. Curiosament, els dos casos tenen una tradició de més de 200 anys. És a dir, que venen d'un origen de l'arquitecte, en el fons, reial o de l'arquitecte que feia prisions per tots els criminals que anaven a Austràlia, és així? I de tot això s'ha acabat fent ha acabat sortint Peter i ha acabat sortint una tradició que si ho mirem bé, curiosament, en els estàndards que mirem de qualitat o d'habitabilitat de ciutats al món, curiosament sempre ens trobem en els primers llocs del rànquing. Melbourne, ens trobem Sydney, ens trobem ciutats australianes que com que estan molt lluny, de vegades no les coneixem bé, però si anem allà veiem que en el fons tenen una bona tradició urbana i una mitjana de qualitat d'arquitectura molt alta. I en el cas holandès, diguem-ne, què podem dir? Que és un cas també paradigmàtic d'un país construït en xarxa, en la qual l'arquitectura treu una tradició molt important des de sempre. En els últims anys també ha tingut una influència també molt gran a tot arreu. Per tant, com deia, agraeixo la confiança per intentar fer aquesta reflexió que en el fons l'únic interès que té és, com deia, és la pròpia reflexió, és intentar debatre com ens tenim que organitzar per aconseguir els objectius que volem aconseguir, diguem-ne, i des d'aquest punt de vista aquesta reflexió i el trobar, convidar gent perquè ens expliquin les seves experiències em sembla que és rellevant en el moment de canvi de molts aspectes que estem vivint. Doncs res, moltes gràcies i té la paraula Floris. Gràcies.
Well, thank you for showing up. I'll speak in English, but I understand there is a translation available for those who do not understand my English well enough. I'll first introduce maybe myself. In my earlier life, I was one of the partners of the Office of Metropolitan Architecture, the office of Rem Koolhaas. I've spent 18 years at the office, which makes me, I think, the longest surviving collaborator of Rem Koolhaas, which is, I can assure you, quite something. But in 2008 I made my own office, basically working from Brussels and Paris at the moment, and since 1 year I have become the state architect, the government architect, and that's something which is a title you get if other colleagues of you say forward you as the best person to do so. So it's both a big honor to become the government architect, and it's part of a long tradition, as you can see in this image. 210 years ago the first government architect was appointed. And at that time it was the king's architect, supposed to work on the royal palaces, and ever since then, of course, the function changed. Now it's called chief government architect. But what has remained the same is that the government architect is still appointed by the king directly. And that has been done to guarantee that the government architects are independent from the politics. So they have a free speech, they have a right to advise when advice is asked for, but they also have a right to advise when their advice is not asked for. So you can put a lot of things on your agenda. In the introduction it was said it's a different way of thinking to plan and to design on the scale of a country. We're not really designing a country that is beyond what an architect can do or a planner can do, but we can analyze the country and try to understand what is going on, what changes are happening. So we do a lot of studies, a lot of analysis in order to understand and also to see in what direction we could develop us as a country. And some elements are really nationwide. If you talk about nature, for instance, protection of nature, but also how do you deal with the coastal areas, water safety, etc. There are a lot of elements that we study on the bigger scale to advise and to see how can we read our country, what is happening, how can we try to work with the forces we might not control, but once you understand them, you might work with them. So that is one part of the work of the state architect. But there's more. The government architect is also supposed to give advice on the quality of all the state-owned buildings. So it's the ministries, it's also the prisons, it's also the military buildings. And that's part of an ongoing process. Of course, there's a lot of buildings owned by the state, and as soon as they are transformed, restored, or new built, then the chief government architect is involved to formulate the question, but also to select the architects that will work on it. And sometimes you will work on it yourself directly, not as a designer, but as the coordinator. For instance, one of the big projects we're working on right now is the renewal of the government building, the central government building in The Hague, a very strange old complex of different buildings from different times, which will be renewed. It's a big project, and there, as a government architect, I'm involved directly, chairing the quality committee and also in appointing the architects. And some things have not changed. I'm still working on royal palaces. These are 3 royal palaces where we currently are transforming, restoring, and so a lot of things have changed and some things have not changed over the 2 centuries. And in the Netherlands, I'm not sure whether it's the same here in Catalonia, but in the Netherlands, if the government has a commission, then 1 or 2% of the building budget is devoted to art. So in our atelier also we are doing the selection of the art works, the artist, and so it's part of what the chief government architect is doing as well. So I'm not doing this on my own. I have a staff from about 30 people who work with me and advise me. But as I said, I also can give advice nobody asks for. When I think it's important to formulate relevant issues, I can do that as well. For that I have made an agenda, and the top priority of my agenda, the number 1 priority, is always to look for added social value in every task we do as a government. All the buildings we own are financed with public money, so I think there is a public responsibility whenever anything is done with these buildings, but also stating that as part of the agenda. And as such, also initiating debates, having clear, define your ambitions, what is going on. For instance, in the Netherlands we have a lot of vacant buildings who are often seen as a problem to deal with. I try to frame them as the perfect occasion to experiment with new housing typologies, with new ways of reusing these buildings. Trying to explain to the architects that they should trade empty buildings like a sculpture is treating as stone. You have a mass you can work with in order to make new forms, and you can transform and you can work with it. But also trying to understand how society is evolving. What is the relevance of the profession of the architect? Of course, we all come from the golden years before the crisis, when everything seems to be possible, and then we witnessed this, the crisis all of a sudden hitting not only the economy, but actually a crisis that has a multi-faced identity. All of a sudden there are crises on different levels, different domains, and the question of course is, how does this impact, at least the question for the chief government architect is, how does this impact architecture? What can architects do? And what does it mean if all of a sudden we have this feeling that everything is dropping and that we have no longer control and that everything that we took for granted all of a sudden changes? And I think this change is something frightening, but has this big potential for innovation, for renewal. And that's what we're trying to find. Because the crisis is severe. These are the numbers in the Netherlands. In 2008 we had 19,000 people working at architectural offices. In this crisis, in the time frame of 5 years, it was halved, this number. So it means something. It means something that as an architectural profession, we have to redefine what our task is, what we are about. But it's not just the crisis that changes the profession. Maybe architects amongst you know this book, the book that Rem Koolhaas wrote, and in it is my drawing table. This is my drawing table when I started actually in 1989 at OMA. And that was a moment where everybody was working on a drawing table. One computer entered the office, and 5 years later the last drawing table left the office. So it took only 5 years to change profoundly a culture of architectural designing that had lasted for centuries and centuries. So there's more than just a crisis changing the profession. The profession became footloose thanks to the computer, a lot of possibilities, but its identity and its way of working, but also what you work on, changed with it. And of course with all the new software, we became much more efficient in the way we can work. And it's my experience that like every 5 years, if you look back, you realize that the work you can do in 2 or 3 days now, 5 years ago you needed a week. So the software also makes the profession different. That's something we realized at OMA at the time. So we thought it would be good to have a mirrored office, which we called AMO. And this mirrored office was thinking of what can the architectural thinking do beyond the realm of architecture itself. So how can we liberate architectural thinking from the practice? And that was something we were looking into. Could we work on other themes, so to redefine the profession? Not that we no longer should design buildings, but we thought it would be good if the same intelligence, is the same approach, design approach, would be applied in other domains as well. Domains of organization, of identity, culture and program. And that's something which I also try to embed in my practice now as the chief government architect. To say, as an architect, it's not just designing buildings, it's about thinking how the society works and what our way of thinking, our way of designing could mean there. I think if you look at things like the social segregation at this moment, I think that's one of the key themes in our society. And we have to think about, as architects, what does this mean? How can we work with it? It's something architects should work with. So as again, as a government architect, I'm looking at these themes. How are they changing our way of living? How are they embedding in our society? For instance, the refugee crisis, which we witnessed last year, an urgent question, a difficult question also, and something which demands something from the architects as well. They have to take a position and they can contribute to solutions. It's a migrant crisis which is hitting Europe and which is not just a question of what do we do, how do we react, how many people. It's also related to how we want to help. And if you look at how different people react to it, for instance, these people, these artists, they try to help. Okay, they donate blankets. It's a kind of strange gesture, and what does it really mean? What can they do? But my question is, what can architects do? And what you see a lot in Germany, but in the Netherlands as well, is that this coming migrants, the refugees, they have to be housed, and it's a very uncertain demand. It comes with a lot of peaks, but then again it drops, and so what is needed is a kind of flexible housing typology. And this is what you usually see, what you call the container dwellings. They can be transported on trucks, and therefore they are very flexible, but they're extremely ugly. And apart from that, they are very costly, because the cost is not in the construction itself. The cost goes into the fact that they have to be transported. You have to do temporarily foundations. You have to do all the installations. So about 2/3 of the cost is not in the quality of the dwelling, but in the fact that they are too ugly to stay. And that, I think, is something architects can work on, especially in the Netherlands, where we have such a long tradition of good social housing. This is social housing in the Netherlands in the beginning of the 90s, of the 20th century. So we have a tradition. So I thought it would be great to see if the architectural profession could contribute with a very interesting demand, how to design with uncertainty. Because these peaks, you cannot predict how many people will come at what time. And of course there's an easy answer to it. Simply do not design dwellings that you only want to use for refugees. Make cheap, flexible dwellings of a good quality, which also can serve for students, can serve for expats, for elderly people, whoever has a limited budget and needs a flexible dwelling. If you do that, then you have no longer the need to transport them all the time, but then you can have different users. And if there's a peak of refugees, you can absorb that. Also, as a chief government architect, I have direct access to the media. So I can come to the television, I can address and write in the newspapers. You know, a very visible position. So I took part of the debate, stating the Netherlands, it's not full, what a lot of populist parties were telling us. But there's plenty of space. We have vacant buildings, so let's rethink the way we can use these vacant buildings to design proper housing. And also let's rethink the way we build new houses. So for that I organized a competition, a call for ideas, which we called A Home Away from Home, initiated with the institutions in the Netherlands who were dealing with the refugees. So we said we use the urgent question now to innovate for a much wider group. With that we had a call of ideas. A lot of teams answered. For the Netherlands this is an extremely big number of ideas, and in order to avoid that we put a lot of architects on to work without any budget. We only asked for the idea, not for the plan. So there was a maximum of 2 A3 they could hand in. Based on these ideas we selected some projects which then got a budget to develop it. Some projects worked on reusing empty offices to live in. For instance, this is an interesting scheme, the Domus Coffer, which can turn any given space in a matter of 2 hours into a dwelling. It's a box you can unfold, and in it is everything you need to make it a dwelling. The kitchen, the bathroom, a shower, heating elements, interesting concept. But in the end we selected 6 teams, different projects which then got this budget to develop their ideas. For instance, an idea to combine a hotel with a refugee asylum seeker center. But also this empty buildings in the agricultural land in the Netherlands. Because some of the refugees come from an agricultural background, so they can be positioned there and help with the local people to reuse vacant buildings there. But also this is interesting. The Netherlands is planning to build solar panel fields, and this is an idea to combine that with a house. And by doing that, every house that you build in a community gives enough energy for 2 houses. So a community that welcomes refugees gets free energy. Also an interesting idea, polystyrene houses, made very cheap, no foundations needed. I'll show you the outcome. And an alternative for the container dwellings, but then made out of wood, solid wood, floor, walls and ceiling. So you can stack them 6 stories, but with a completely different identity. Something which a lot of people in the world are thinking about. How can we deal with the refugee crisis? But surprisingly enough, there's not that many prototypes being built. So all of a sudden, since we were doing this, I got this invitation from the United Nations in New York to present it. So you can see that initiatives like that, a small country like the Netherlands, can contribute. And we got this budget to make prototypes scale 1:1. This is this polystyrene house. And actually these prototypes were presented 2 weeks ago, scale 1:1, at the Dutch Design Week in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And interestingly enough, between having organized this idea, a call for ideas and the prototypes, it's only 9 months. So you can do rapid actions in that field. And interestingly enough, all these prototypes have been proven that convincing that different cities are going to build and to use them now for actually to house people and not only refugees. So in that sense it works as such. Because these houses are cheap, they are flexible, and I always told the architects a low budget is no excuse for low quality, and they took that. So they made houses that have a kind of surprising spatial qualities despite a low budget. It makes them attractive for many people to use them. So in the left corner once more these container houses that are usually used, and on the right the alternative we have developed now. Kind of beautiful wooden house that everybody who enters it says, well, I could live here as well. So it's cheap, it's flexible, and has this good quality. And these are prototypes ready to use. Some prototypes we are developing a bit further. This is this polystyrene house, made out of 1 block, nesting elements, as you can see in the model this lady is putting together. So you have 0 garbage, all the material you can use. And the fact that it's polystyrene makes it usable for all climate zones, both heat climate and very cold climates. And it's something you can prepare as polystyrene blocks, you can ship it, and people then can build their own house. They can plaster it with local materials, they can cut out windows. And being out of polystyrene, it doesn't weigh anything, so it's very cheap. And it's something we, here you see the scale 1:1 project with a cardboard interior. And this is something we want to develop further, maybe for the Netherlands, because a lot of people say, well, for me this would be a perfect holiday dwelling. Actually, our Queen visited our prototypes also, because the Royal House still is very linked to these initiatives. But also what we have now contacts with Lebanon to see if we can do something in the refugee camps. Also in Jordania we have now contacts. The difficulty there is that they won't allow permanent settlements, so you cannot build in concrete. They want to stop that because they fear that the settlements become permanent. So these people are living in terrible, terrible conditions, and maybe these polystyrene houses could make the difference. Something we're trying, and later this year also will be in Mumbai in India for the slums to see if some of the techniques we have developed can be applied. I'll finish with the new task we're trying to address, and it's the fact how our society is developing, how it is becoming more and more atomized, how the society as such is becoming more and more individual, and what does that mean? In the Netherlands we build very good houses, and nothing wrong with it, but they are very much monocultures. And these monocultures have their problems. There's a lot of loneliness appearing all of a sudden. And something we should take serious as architects as well. And also a society in the Netherlands where the population is aging rapidly. So we are facing this enormous amount of people, aging people. And I think it's important as a society to find an answer to that. Like Simone de Beauvoir already wrote, in the way a society treats its elderly people, you can value the essence of its society. So the next competition for call for ideas we're organizing, we called Who Cares? It has this double meaning, like who cares, like neglected, or who cares, who is actually taking responsibility. And again, something we're doing in order to realize real projects. And the statement here is that in our housing areas, everything has become different. Instead of big families, we're growing to 40% of households, single households, single person households. We have the elderly people now increasing in their numbers. The fact that there's a lot of loneliness in these neighborhoods, but also the fact that with the migration there is not a single cultural background but a multitude. So basically everything has become different except for our housing areas. So that is actually what we ask for the next competition. Rethink our neighborhoods based on how do we care for the elderly, with the assumption if we take care of the elderly in a proper way, we take care for everybody in the proper way. So in that sense, as a chief government architect, it's not just designing the country, but actually putting on the agenda the relevant issues, and then from there design what your country should look like. And that's something which asks for innovation and experiment, and that's also why I often use this image. It's if you zoom out, it's Icarus, and I think that is the example we should follow. Try, and don't be afraid to fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Floris. I'm Peter Poulet from the State of New South Wales in Australia, also a government architect, one of a number in Australia. But unlike Floris, I don't have a royal mandate, which is a blessing as well as a problem, I'd suggest. But it's interesting that this conference is called at this time, because my office has just undergone significant change, and unfortunately, again, I've been bettered by the earlier speaker, because my office is only 200 years old this year. So the Europeans won again. Having said that, our office is transforming significantly, and that's what I would want to talk to you about today. As Vicente mentioned, we are a network right across Australia, a loose coalition I'd call it, who help one another in exactly the same manner as colleagues do, and we talk about specific issues that are common to all of us, I think. And so the notion that a chief architect, a government architect, is specific to place is very important, but also the fact that we have common concerns and common issues to address. And so we meet annually, the Ghana network as it's called here, and there's a website that you can have a look at, and we correspond with one another about those broader issues that we're all concerned with. And certainly the social agenda and the environmental and sustainability agenda is very big on the minds of us all in Australia and in New South Wales particularly. But in New South Wales, when the British first colonised, they pretended that there was no one there. But we actually have a 40,000 plus year old culture. The original inhabitants, the Aboriginal people were there, and it's only in recent decades that we've started recognising that they have much to offer, particularly to us in the design professions, the architects. This is a map of New South Wales, and it's unusual in that it is a map with Aboriginal nations superimposed on it. So it's clear that there were people inhabiting our colony, and that there were lessons to learn from those people. When we meet in Australia, or in Sydney particularly, we always acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, which is interesting because, again, it's a sign that we are growing roots in a place that we have only been in for 200 years. The Aboriginals, when they lived there, actually tended the land very carefully and sustainably, and this is an early colonial picture showing what they did best. They kept grasslands available for the animals that they hunted, and they hunted those animals using fire and clearing in a manner that actually enhanced the land, unlike what we did as colonial people and damaged the land, in fact, and we're now doing much repair work. So here's the first colony, the European grid, the settlement, all those accoutrements of colonial Britain are there. Started as a penal colony, so a harsh place and no place for genteel professionals such as architects. So there was a moment in time when there was the realisation that the colony needed a hospital, and so the governor of the time, Governor Macquarie, did what was called a private-public partnership, and he commissioned a group of local businessmen to build a hospital, and in return they were able to undertake the rum trade in the colony, which seemed infinitely sensible. So there was a drunken colony with sick people accommodated. There was a moment in time when the hospital was almost built, but it started collapsing due to poor construction. And at that point, they realised that they maybe needed a professional, maybe an architect, to help repair the damage and ensure that the colony, the government, the community were getting what they were paying for. So again, those social concerns of a chief architect or government architect were born in those days, where we kept the bastards honest. And so Governor Macquarie asked a chap called Francis Greenway, who happened to be an architect and happened to have been committed to the colony because he forged some documents, and all architects have got a very good hand, I believe, so it's probably appropriate that we chose Francis Greenway to be the first government architect, and he rectified that work, and from then on the government saw value in having somebody independent, somebody who is keeping the public interest at heart and making sure that industry and all those people that were building the colony at the time were kept honest. That was then, I guess, enlarged in a big part when the government architect of the day, was commissioned to do public works. And it was a civilising or a colonising event or process where the government architect of the day would build the hospitals, the schools, the courthouses, the police stations, and ultimately the jails, as Vicente tells us. The entire colony was a jail. You couldn't run anywhere, so it didn't matter. But there did come a time when you needed to lock the difficult ones up. And as an aside, I was actually state architect in Tasmania, which was where New South Wales would send their hardened criminals that they couldn't break. So Tasmania is again even more harsh than that environment of New South Wales. And much cruelty was done in those days, not only to the indigenous population, but also to the people that came for relatively minor crimes. So it started in an inauspicious, all right, you can have the Opera House instead, manner, but the colony built and grew, and the government architects of the time always were interested in public works. And as I said, all those utilitarian or functional buildings that defined or put the parameters around a civil society, and then we moved into cultural institutions. But at that time, there was already a very developed private sector. And so the government architects started trading or negotiating or working with a mature private sector to develop the public buildings of the time. And Utzon is a grand example of a brilliant architect who lost to politics in the end and was removed from the project. Our iconic building, a building I think that defines Australia, but certainly Sydney and New South Wales. And as I said, the office is only 200 years old. I'm sorry, we're very young. And it's waxed and waned in size. It's had many people. In the 60s and 70s, it had up to 1,500, 1,700 people. And most recently, in my time, we were down to 3 for a moment when we were transforming and reinventing ourselves. Because only this year, in the 200th year, we have redefined what our office does. Our office is no longer the office that will build things necessarily, because as I said earlier, we have a very mature industry. In fact, we have an international industry. Australian architects go and do much work in Southeast Asia, and they are very good architects in building very good buildings. So what are we? We are the custodians of the public good, as opposed to necessarily the draftsman's hand for the government. And we have this interface role now, which is to help Sydney build and become a better city. Because we are experiencing massive growth in New South Wales and in Sydney, which is the opposite problem to many parts of Europe, where in the next 20 to 30 years we'll have more than 2 million people added to Sydney's population. And how will they live? Where will they live? What sort of city will that become? And again, the social issues are front and centre, where issues of equity to service, equitable access to services, and a sustainable environment are paramount and on our agenda. As I said, 200 years this year is marked by what we're calling GA 200 plus. So we're anticipating another 200 years in the office. Not that I'll necessarily be there. But having said that, it's important to stay relevant, it's important to stay connected, it's important to be useful to our communities. And so that's why I've undertaken a fairly significant and radical change. We've aligned with all the other government architects in Australia in terms of what we do. And it is a strategic, independent policy position, advising government and interrelating and connecting with industry. So we are becoming the boundary spanning group who connect government with the profession, with industry, with academia, and ultimately with community. Because to join those voices up is to get better outcomes, in my opinion. So we have run a series of seminars, and that's only 6 that I show you there, this year, exploring what is a government architect, what is important to our communities, to our profession, to our government, and how should we change and what should we be changing into. So that's been an interesting exercise because it has confirmed the importance of the social charter, the social good that architecture has the potential to deliver. So suddenly, not only architects, but the community and even government, our government has recognised the value of architecture, design and design thinking. And for a very young colony, that's been a difficult conversation because we have been a frontier town for a long time. It's not a jungle any longer, it's more like bush now, but we are building things that are now, I think, world class. So what I introduced to the conversation is design thinking, the fact that we as architects have a natural instinct, we're trained this way, to seek out problems, to iterate, to develop the best solutions possible. So we are now not only offering that as in the built environment space, but we are working with the Public Service Commission to deliver that to government. So architects are now in the forefront of helping reform government processes and government agendas. Totally, almost surreptitiously, but totally usefully, and we're judged by the fact that people are asking us to do this. So integrated design, integrated practice helps us seek the problems out in a different way and find solutions in a manner that is uniquely design-focused and design-led. So design is paramount in New South Wales at the moment in the way the state is planning to grow in the near future. And we all know the paradigm. We've always looked at the economics, and design has been something that we add on at the end. We're wanting to reverse that. We're wanting to say that design is actually intelligent thinking at the front end when we can make the most impact, and that's when we need to be the most creative in what we're anticipating for the future. And again, in terms of costs and time, clearly the intelligent thinking should be done at the front, and that's where design thinking and we as a profession should be leading. And somehow we're convincing government at the moment that is the case. Without a mandate, so it's dangerous, it's tenuous, but in many ways that gives us a freedom too. So unless people see common sense in what we're offering, they don't take it up. So our arguments need to be very persuasive. We need to make sure that people understand the value of good design. And most recently, we've only been on this journey, I should say, for the last 9-10 months. We were, up until the start of this year, the traditional office that I described, the 200-year-old office. And it's only this year that we have transformed. We have moved to the Department of Planning. We have got good access to the ministers and almost to the Premier. And so we have good conversations around what is important to make our communities better. And so the first document that we published, and I'll give you the web link to that later, it'll come up at the end, is a thing called Better Placed. And it's a design-led approach using architecture and design to better our habitations, our public spaces. It's been well received, and it's in a process of, I guess, conversation with all the stakeholders. There are many resistances, particularly from those people who don't understand yet the value of design and how design can make significant improvements to the way they do business. And I'm talking about government agencies. It's been the public sector that's wanted to change, with the support of the private sector, interestingly enough. The private architects have seen the value of an advocate in government for good design, because often as private architects they are thwarted in their attempts to do good work because of other reasons. So we are advocating for good design all the way through, and so we have good support, as I said earlier, from both the profession and from academia, so across the board. And design is a great thing because it also includes everyone in the conversation. Design is an iterative process that involves a number of conversations. We don't come with solutions straight up. So the way we have described design to our ministerial colleagues, our government, is that it is a process. I even go to the trouble of saying I don't care how something looks. It's more important how it functions and what service it provides more than what it is. So what's the value add in what we're doing as a building or as a piece of architecture or urban realm? And that's where the politicians have liked the fact that we are using design to actually determine that, because then quality is a conversation starter as well. And quality is something that we haven't had a lot of in all government projects in New South Wales. So we're positioning this policy not only in architecture, not only in the urban realm, but as a policy on design and design thinking and a design method that will improve the lives of the citizens of New South Wales. And so we've moved a long way from architecture, and yet architecture is our foundation, and we aren't losing sight of that, because we are able to work at the policy level and yet still deliver a building. So the unusual thing about architects is they work at scales, and they span those scales, and we're good at iterating, and we're good at synthesising information and coming and moving forward. And so that's how we're positioning the draft policy. And importantly, we've established what we think are 7 key immutable principles that are a way of defining what we think is important in design. And we actually scoured the globe for these, I think, and we're very keen to have a conversation around them. But you can see them here. We need to understand the place that we are designing in. We need to be sustainable, clearly, and equitable, which is what, Floris, you were talking about earlier. We need to have enjoyable and safe things, functional things. There is that issue of value and adding to the stock of things. And what's equally important is it needs to be distinctive, appealing, and something that lifts the soul, lifts the spirit. Architecture is still in this document, but in different language. And what's interesting is we now apply those 7 principles to a number of scales, a number of areas of work that are necessary. Cities and towns is clearly there, the public realm and what public good the work that we do delivers, and of course the buildings, the architecture. But there will be many more. We'll add to these focus areas as time goes on. Clearly transport, mass transport is one. Clearly the green space and that agenda is another. So there'll be a number of these focus groups or lenses that we apply the 7 principles to interrogate those elements and decide how they are best judged to be good, how they are best judged to be good design and succeeding in delivering good public outcomes. And interestingly enough, I have to show you this. This is my minister, and he doesn't look particularly happy there, which is unusual because he's always happy when he sees me. However, he was talking in the newspaper only recently about Sydney's population, and the quote there that I've put in higher and more bold lettering is that we could either be Shanghai or Barcelona, and that he prefers Barcelona. So I'm here learning as well, and it's not to say that Australia doesn't look widely. But even when my minister has the understanding that there is a quality of space here and a quality of the urban condition here that is admirable and that you shouldn't lose sight of, I think you should take note. And another book we're producing that I didn't bring with me because it's still at the printer is The Missing Middle. And he spoke about the need to have different typologies of housing, because we are at the point of growing significantly, as I mentioned, and that's predominantly been done in tower apartment blocks. And we have many single houses on suburban blocks, and we have tower blocks. And he's suggesting that there is a missing middle, and that's why he was pointing to Barcelona, the six or so stories, the urban, what he's called the missing middle, which is an interesting thing. The urban buildings that are not too tall, but they're not single dwellings as well. And what do they represent, and how are they built, and how do we make those available to people in Sydney and in New South Wales? And so we are running a competition also, another leaf from the book, to investigate that and test this document to see how the design profession, how architects will come up with ideas within the parameters that we have set. Because what we've also done is said, if you work with our parameters, you will get planning approval as complying development. So it is attractive to developers to undertake this process to move more quickly to build these sorts of houses or dwellings because we have a shortage and we have many more people coming. And yet we want the quality and we want the innovation and we want the urban amenity to be delivered as well. So how is that going to happen? So we're testing it with a design competition, which is fun. So I said I'd show you some links here. I think I'm leaving this presentation here, so it will be available for those who need it. But there's a link to our office. There's a link to us in planning. There's a link to the red document, and there's a link to the celebration of our 200 years. So we're doing exciting things. It's interesting to have us here at this moment in time because we have changed so significantly, and I'm very proud of the fact that I think there's a maturity in our government that we haven't seen before, and there's a maturity in the industry that is expecting that, and that's a good thing. There's a partnership happening. Thank you. Stay here.
Bueno, obriríem ara si hi hagués alguna pregunta, alguna qüestió, alguna cosa que volguéssiu que s'afegixin tant per part del Floris i del Peter com per part, diguem-ne, del Vicente o de mi mateix. Endavant.
Hi, my name is Enric Masip Bosch. I thank you for your lectures this evening. I think they have been very illustrating, very illustrative of several possibilities we have in our profession. Nevertheless, even though your figures in your countries are very old, both of them, and they have a very long tradition, it has been my understanding that they are pointing to two different directions. I think that Floris what you have explained is more, in a way, I have understood it like more propositive. Your role is more generating prognosis and inducing change, and I think Peter, you have explained your role more as a reactive, responding more to political needs or social needs, etc. I think they somehow draw the two limits, the two possible limits that I understand a state architect can have. And my question would be, how is this actual relationship with society through politicians that in your both cases surely have to have? You are appointed by the Queen in this case. Your role is decided politically, I suppose, in sort of votation. Both are roles that rely on the trust of the people that appoint you. But how do you relate your ideas, your understanding of the social, economical, architectural situation in your countries, how do you transport these ideas to these people appointing your roles? And how do you connect citizenship and politicians through your figures?
Thank you for that question. It's indeed a very important one to realize that you not should work somewhere and then being completely dissociated from the society. So in that sense we have two mechanisms. First of all, I have direct access to the ministers. So I talk with ministers of different departments. Some departments also have special advisors who are working with me. So I have a link to the politics, although my advice is politically independent. And apart from that, whenever we do a project, we also always seek local partners. So first, it's very important not to tell people what to do, but to collaborate with local partners in order to be relevant on the domain. And a lot of these questions actually come from local partners. So a lot of people come to me and ask me for my help, and in that sense these collaborations are linked to the society as much as possible.
You're right in saying that I don't necessarily have a clear mandate, and so we are very reactive. I'm very keen to ensure that it is common sense that our opinion is valued. And so we do consult widely, we talk to local council significantly, and we have a weekly meeting with the Minister's office. So we are very connected to the politics, probably too closely at times. But what we are building is the trust, I think, and the community cachet to then give us more mandate. So we will slowly over time move from being reactive to being propositional. I think that's important to note. And I see our role as curatorial and in partnership with local council, with the professions to understand local conditions and local issues, but give the umbrella or and clarity of purpose and direction, which is statewide. Is that helpful?
Alguna altra intervenció? Jo sí que faria una pregunta, si em permeteu, m'avanço. Jo voldria saber, en els dos casos, quina és és a dir, aquí a Catalunya i a Barcelona hi ha una tradició molt forta d'arquitectes de ciutat. L'arquitecte en cap de Barcelona sempre ha sigut una figura, diguem-ne, amb un pes molt fort dintre de la reflexió arquitectònica. Jo diria que ha sigut una de les peces que ha liderat la reflexió arquitectònica que avui estem parlant. En els dos casos, en el cas holandès o en el cas australià, existeix la figura de l'arquitecte a la ciutat i, si existeix, quina és la relació que es produeix entre l'arquitecte d'estat i ja no tant l'autoritat local com la reflexió que la ciutat fa sobre els seus propis planejaments. Existeix?
Well, you're right. In New South Wales or in Sydney, there are city architects, and we are developing this network because Sydney is actually growing at the pace where it is no longer going to be monocentric, it'll be polycentric. And so there are already 3 other city architects in Sydney. There's one in the CBD, as we know, where the Opera House is, but there's now one in Parramatta, Blacktown and Penrith. And we will be developing a 3-city metropolis, I guess, because of this additional population growth we're having. So it's essential that we have people who understand the local condition, the local politics, the local community, and all we do is give them that blanket assurance, the processes, the support, to understand that there are times when issues are bigger than just their city, and that sometimes is very helpful. So yes, that is a very good process, and we're developing that network more widely, and again, favourably looked upon by government. Yeah.
In the Netherlands also, the function of city architect does exist. So, but not all the cities have them. Cities have a freedom to appoint a city architect or not. And, but if they have not, usually the bigger cities have an urban department that deals with these questions. And they know to find me and I know to find them. So there's a dialogue going on. And like for instance, the theme I mentioned in the end of my lecture, the Who Cares competition. I only want to do competitions where in the end we construct the winning scheme. And in that sense, we linked this competition now to 4 cities. And in these cities, we formulate with the city architect or with the city departments what is the question. And then we involve not only the city architect, but also the housing corporations. And we also involve those who are giving care. And in that sense, we're building a coalition of people working on the field. And with them, we first of all formulate, okay, this is the question we should ask. And from there, we organize the competition. And from there, we then also realize the winning scheme. And that only is possible if you have all these links. And you cannot work on one scale only. You have to go through all the scales, link to all the local parties. And in this collaboration, I think the chief government architect can be the one who really focuses on innovation. Because the lower you get, the more your feet are in the mud and the more and I am in a position where I actually can have not a very abstract debate, but I can point out the necessity to rethink, to reformulate, to change and to innovate. And that is how I think our role should be played.
Hi, hello. I have a very practical question actually, and that is how long are you staying at your position? Is it a lifelong position? Should it be lifelong or just 4 years, 8 years, like politicians?
Well, in the Netherlands, it's between 3 and 5 years. And they want to renew it every year, so many years, in order to be assured that also this innovation part of the profession is guaranteed. And it also it is supposed to be part-time, so I'm doing it 3 days a week. But on the same time, it's kind of cluster bomb on your agenda, so the 3 days are spread out over 7 days. But nevertheless, they want you to be a practicing architect, so not only doing this work, but also being in the field. And so 3 to 5 years. My predecessors didn't last 3 years, so it's tough though. No. I'm trying to though. No.
In my case, it's a 5-year contract, but it can be renewed, and it has been in the past, so it is a little flexible. It is a full-time position, but the pattern of my office is that I am bringing people in and cycling them through. So what I'm trying to do is seed the profession with people who understand how to work in government. So that will take some time. And I'm very aware of needing to stay current. So I can't see myself going for more than 5 years or so, because I still love being an architect.
Bueno, escolteu, em toca el tancament. Jo, primer de tot, voldria agrair moltíssim en el Peter i en el Floris la seva presència avui aquí, el seu viatge i que ens hagin vingut a explicar la seva experiència. La veritat és que això forma part d'unes reflexions que teníem amb el Vicente. De fet, el Vicente i jo som sospitosos de voler crear-nos una plaça, però no ho penseu, no té res a veure amb això, no té res a veure amb aquest tema, no. No, la reflexió ve d'una reflexió que és un tema d'escala, i jo crec que avui l'arquitecte en cap de Barcelona, i perdoneu que ho comenci per aquí, continua sent una peça molt important, però segurament Barcelona se'ns ha quedat petit a tots. És a dir, jo crec que hi ha en aquests moments alguns problemes que van més enllà de la ciutat. En parlàvem la setmana passada en la jornada sobre l'agenda urbana, i estem en un moment de fer reflexions a una escala superior, i estem en un moment de fer reflexions en un altre moment. No podem anar estirant, diguem-ne, d'un model que funcionava fa 20 anys però que avui ja, diguem-ne, no funciona. Això ens va portar a fer aquestes reflexions, i jo crec que l'acte d'avui és una petita peça d'un estudi, com ha dit el Vicente, que ha fet l'Institut d'Arquitectura Avançada, que és un estudi, un benchmarking, diguem-ne, de com s'organitzen alguns territoris a nivell més global, a una altra escala que no és únicament l'escala de ciutat, i heu de saber que aquest estudi, per part nostra, per part de l'Institut, serà presentat als departaments de la Generalitat que estan treballant en aquests moments en projectes com la llei d'arquitectura o la llei de territori, perquè crec que en el debat d'aquestes dues lleis que es produiran en el Parlament els temes d'escala seran ben presents, sobretot en la llei de territori, que, com sabeu, presentarem la propera setmana el dia 18. La multiescalaritat de l'ordenació del territori va ser un tema molt tractat en els debats de l'Habitat 3 a Quito, i el fet que les ciutats s'hagin de posar d'acord amb els governs subnacionals i amb els governs nacionals per produir estratègies conjuntes d'ordenació del territori avui és un fet absolutament indubtable. I, per tant, com deia el Floris, la multiescalaritat de l'ordenació i el pensament, diguem-ne, a diferents nivells, avui és un tema que està a l'ordre del dia. No sé quin impacte tindrà l'estudi que hem fet sobre les diferents lleis, jo crec que algun, no crec que d'això se'n derivi la creació de la figura d'un arquitecte d'estat, que ningú pateixi, diguem-ne, però sí, o sí, no ho sé, però sí que mentrestant podem anar pensant en com afrontar el debat del territori i el debat de l'arquitectura a una escala més important que no l'estrictament local. Jo crec que això sí que és un debat que s'ha de posar sobre la taula i s'ha de posar ara que hi ha aquestes iniciatives per part del Departament. Bé, només recordar-vos que aquest és el segon acte de 4, vam fer la setmana passada a l'agenda urbana, aquesta setmana aquest acte, i que la setmana que ve hi ha 2 jornades, una sobre la llei de territori que ja l'he anomenat, que és la presentació de la nova llei de territori, que és el dia 18, i una altra sobre la qualitat d'arquitectura i els concursos d'arquitectura, és a dir, com l'administració fa concursos d'arquitectura. Això té a veure també amb el debat de la llei d'arquitectura i també té a veure amb el que hem parlat avui, i és una cosa que posarem sobre la taula el dia 17, en relació també amb autoritats locals, amb la Diputació que estarà present, amb l'àrea metropolitana que estarà present, i ens intentarem posar d'acord, com a mínim intentarem organitzar un debat també amb referents internacionals de com s'organitzen els millors concursos en aquest país i com ho hem de fer. Res més, agrair-vos a tots la presència, agrair una altra vegada en el Peter i en el Floris i també en la gent de l'IAC que ens hagin ajudat a organitzar això, i dir-vos que ara aquí fora tenim una petita copa de cava per si voleu acabar de fer alguna conversa. Moltes gràcies a tots.